The November air over Boston carried a sharp, early morning chill, the kind that cut through layers as if determined to remind anyone outside that winter was coming early. Emily Carver moved slowly across the Longfellow Bridge, her breath rising in pale clouds. At 32, she looked older than she had a month ago, before the nausea, before the sleepless nights, before Andrew walked out and left her with nothing but silence and a pregnancy no one should ever face alone. Her gloved hand rested on her stomach as she walked, steadying herself with each step. 3 heartbeats, 3 lives she hadn't planned for, 3 reasons she couldn't fall apart, yet every part of her felt like it was crumbling. The city around her was just beginning to stir, a lone cyclist cutting through the wind, the slurred clang of a train pulling into Charles/MG, the distant hum of traffic on Starrow Drive. Life was moving forward. Hers felt suspended in midair. Emily stopped at the center of the bridge, gripping the cold railing. She stared at the Charles River, its dark surface rippling with small, wind-driven waves. She hated that she understood why people came to bridges when they were lost. Not to jump, just to sit with the possibility, to feel the weight of the world pressing from both sides. Her phone rang, abrupt and jarring in the quiet. She flinched, blinking away the sting of tears. For a moment she considered letting it ring, but something, a memory, a reflex, maybe survival, made her answer. "Emily Carver?" a man asked, his voice steady and formal. "Yes." "This is Attorney Martin Feldman. I urgently need to speak with you regarding the estate of Benjamin Goldman." Emily froze. Benjamin, her quiet, elderly neighbor from the floor below, hadn't been seen in weeks. He rarely spoke, always gentle, always polite, always dignified in a way that made her admire him without really knowing him. What happened?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm very sorry. Mr. Goldman passed away recently. I need you to come to my office this morning. It's important." Important. Nothing in her life felt important anymore. And yet the weight in his tone pushed her forward. Okay, I'll be there." The call ended. Emily stood still for a few seconds, breathing through the ache in her chest. Then she turned around and began walking back toward the city. Martin Feldman's office sat on Charles Street in Beacon Hill, tucked behind cream-colored shutters and a brass nameplate that looked older than Emily. She stepped inside, brushing off the cold, and found the attorney waiting for her, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of posture that came from years of careful discipline. "Ms. Carver," he greeted, offering a seat. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Emily sat, her hands clasped tightly. "I don't understand why I'm here." Martin folded his hands atop a stack of documents. "Mr. Goldman named you as his primary heir." For a moment, the words didn't make sense. They just hung in the air, heavy and absurd. I think you must be mistaken. We barely knew each other." "He was very clear in his wishes," Martin said, sliding the papers toward her. "Mr. Goldman's estate is sizable, estimated at between $8.5 and $11.5 million. His townhouse, 2 commercial properties, investment accounts, artwork, all designated to you." Emily's breath caught. The world tilted. "But," Martin continued, "there are conditions." Of course there were. Nothing in her life had ever been simple. "He left 5 tasks," he said. "Specific, personal tasks tied to his life and values. Completing them is necessary for the full inheritance." Emily's fingers trembled as she reached for the envelope he held out. Letter number 1, written in Benjamin's unmistakably neat script. Her heart raced. She didn't understand why he chose her. She didn't understand any of this. But as she held the letter, something inside her shifted, just slightly, but enough. For the first time in weeks, the bridge didn't feel like her only destination. The envelope felt heavier than its size should allow. Emily held it in her lap long after she returned to her small apartment in Cambridge. staring at Benjamin's handwriting. There was something deliberate in the way he formed each letter, measured, careful, as though words were things to be respected. When she finally opened it, the faint scent of old paper and cedar drifted out, the kind that clung to books kept for decades. Dear Emily, if you're reading this, it means the loneliness I carried for many years has finally ended. The first line tightened something in her chest. He wrote about his childhood, Brooklyn in the 1950s, cramped apartment above his parents' tailor shop, the smell of wool steam-pressed late into the night. He described his mother, Rivka, with hands worn from mending other people's clothing. His father, Aaron, who never raised his voice but carried sorrow like a second skin. They immigrated from Eastern Europe with almost nothing, hoping America would give them dignity. Instead, life swallowed them quietly. I was a disappointment to them, and they were a disappointment to me, though we never said it out loud. That was the way of our home. Love and disappointment living side by side, never named, never resolved. When they died, I was too angry to honor them properly, and too ashamed to go back later. Emily paused, absorbing the honesty. She imagined Benjamin young, tall, awkward, brilliant, caught between generations, between expectations, between worlds. Your task is simple, Emily. Restore dignity to the people who shaped me. Find my parents. Find what I abandoned. Let them be remembered kindly, even if it comes late. The letter ended with directions, a partial record, a handwritten note. They deserve better than what I gave. Emily folded the letter with trembling hands. For the first time since Andrew left, her tears were not from pain. The next morning, she sat in the dimly lit records room at the Boston Public Library, scrolling through digitized burial documents. It took hours cross-checking names, dates, districts. She followed small pieces of information from the letter and pieced together a trail long grown cold. At last, she found two matching entries, Rivka Goldman and Aaron Goldman, buried decades ago at Granary Burying Ground. She packed gloves, cleaning cloths, water, and headed to the cemetery. The granary grounds were quiet that afternoon. The winter sky turning pale gray as she walked between the tilting stones. Tourists lingered near the graves of famous patriots, but Emily searched the older, forgotten rows. After nearly an hour, she found them. Two weathered stones slanted toward each other, moss creeping across their surfaces. Her breath caught. Neglect was expected for graves this old, but something about their loneliness struck her deeply. "These are yours," she whispered, as if speaking to Benjamin across time. She knelt and began cleaning, brushing away leaves, wiping dirt, clearing the base where soil had piled up. The cold bit at her fingers, but she didn't stop. She worked until the inscriptions, barely legible, revealed themselves under layers of grime. Over the next 2 days, she returned with stronger tools. She gently scrubbed, polished, and documented damage. She contacted a stonemason to repair the fractured corners and ordered 2 simple but elegant Jewish markers, respectful, traditional, nothing extravagant. When the work was finished, she placed a small stone atop each headstone, following custom, a gesture that said, "You are remembered." Emily stepped back, hands cold, eyes warm. A soft peace settled over her, something she hadn't felt in months. She took photos, clean stones, repaired bases, new markers catching the pale winter light, and emailed them to Martin with a short note. Task 1 completed. Later, standing at the cemetery gate, she touched her stomach. For the first time since Andrew walked out, the weight inside her felt less like fear and more like purpose. Benjamin's letter had reached her at her lowest, but his parents' graves had given her something even deeper, a reason to keep moving. Emily didn't open letter number 2 right away. She waited until the apartment went quiet, until the hum of the heater drowned out the sharpness of her thoughts. Her hands shook slightly as she unfolded the thick paper. Benjamin's handwriting was the same, Steady, careful, almost tender. Emily, you now know something about my past. This next task will force you to look into yours. I once believed forgiveness meant letting someone back into your life. I was wrong. Sometimes forgiveness is simply choosing compassion when it is not deserved. Your task: do good for someone who hurt you deeply, and do it anonymously. They must never know why their life improved. The letter ended there. No extra lines. No gentle qualifiers. Just the task. Emily leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Her life had more than enough heartbreak. Her father leaving, Andrew's abandonment, the administrator who questioned every move she made during her first years of teaching. And that last one, Grace Hawkins, rose in her memory with almost painful clarity. Grace, the vice principal who seemed determined to break her, who nitpicked lesson plans, schedule requests, hallway interactions, who circulated evaluations that left Emily feeling small, inadequate, almost invisible. Grace hadn't just hurt her professionally. She had deepened the cracks in Emily's confidence during one of the most fragile years of her life. If Benjamin wanted her to help someone who wronged her, truly wronged her, Grace fit better than anyone, and that made the task harder. Tracking down Grace's address took a few calls to the district office and a search through public directories. Emily expected to feel satisfaction at the thought of peeking into Grace's life, but instead she felt uneasy. Still, she followed Benjamin's instructions. No bitterness, no revenge, just compassion. Grace lived in a tired 3-story building in Chelsea, the kind of place where the paint peeled at the corners and the hallway smelled faintly of mildew. Emily waited in her car until she saw her former vice principal hustle inside, carrying 2 bags of groceries, not from a store, but from a food pantry. A heavy realization settled in her chest. The next day, Emily returned and watched as a teenage girl helped Grace up the stairs, her movements slow and stiff. Grace was talking to the girl gently, supportively, nothing like the rigid, unforgiving administrator Emily had known. A neighbor passing by mentioned the girl had an autoimmune condition that kept her in and out of school. Grace cared for her alone. Hardship softened people. Sometimes it crushed them. Emily couldn't tell which had happened to Grace. She got to work. 2 days later, Grace received a call from a rental office she'd never contacted, informing her that she'd been approved for a newly renovated 2-bedroom unit in the same neighborhood. First month's rent already covered, deposit paid. She insisted there must be a mistake, but the leasing agent explained the application was submitted anonymously by someone who believes you deserve stability. Emily arranged for groceries to be delivered weekly, good quality food, fresh produce, specific medical-safe items for the daughter. She left envelopes at Grace's door with resource lists, support groups, food assistance programs, after-school tutoring for her student, heating assistance for the winter. Every action was carefully untraceable. The point wasn't recognition. It was restoration. A week later, Emily drove by the school where Grace still worked part-time. She watched from the parking lot as Grace spoke to a student, listening patiently, even laughing. The sharp edges Emily remembered were worn down, replaced with something gentler. Maybe Grace had always carried softness inside, just buried under stress and fear. Or maybe hardship had exposed the parts she once hid. Emily felt something loosen inside her. Not forgiveness in the traditional sense, but release. A quiet relief that surprised her with its warmth. That evening, she emailed Martin. Task 2 completed. His reply came minutes later. Benjamin would be proud. You have honored the spirit of this task fully. Emily closed her laptop and rested her hands over her stomach. For the first time in years, she realized she wasn't carrying anger anymore. Just hope, small, tentative, but real. The 3rd letter arrived in the same cream-colored envelope, sealed with the same quiet formality. Emily hesitated before opening it. Each task so far had shifted something inside her. nudging pieces of her life into shapes she didn't know she could hold. When she finally unfolded the page, Benjamin's words felt both intimate and heavy. "Emily, you have restored dignity to the past and compassion to the present. Now I ask you to reclaim something that was taken from my family long before I understood its value." He wrote about music, not the kind played to impress, but the kind that shaped the soul of a home. When his parents first immigrated, they brought with them a single treasure, a pre-war Steinway Model B. Purchased secondhand in New York in the 1930s, its serial number etched into Benjamin's memory like scripture. His mother played every night after work, soft melodies drifting through their cramped Brooklyn apartment. But when they moved across states during a difficult financial stretch, the moving company lost it, or sold it, or damaged it. No one ever gave them an answer. "I spent years searching," the letter continued, "and then I stopped, not because it hurt, but because life taught me to bury the things that mattered most. You must find it, if not the instrument itself, then its echo, something of equal spirit, something that can sit in my home again." It was the first time one of the tasks felt truly impossible. Over the next week, Emily plunged into a world she barely understood. Piano forums, auction listings, restoration blogs, musicians' message boards, serial number archives. She pored over photographs, scrutinized keys and legs and lids, learning the subtle differences between pre-war and post-war Steinways. She learned how serial numbers mapped histories, how refinishing could mask origin, how many pianos were lost to time. Her determination grew. Maybe it wasn't just about Benjamin anymore. Maybe this task was also about restoring something she herself had lost. Faith, direction, a sense of worth. On the 5th day, a user on a restoration forum responded to an inquiry she had barely hoped would be noticed. "You should talk to Nathan Weir. If a piano from that era is still somewhere in Boston, he'll know." Nathan's workshop in Back Bay smelled of varnish, aged wood, and old stories. Rows of dismantled pianos stood like silent witnesses as he wiped his hands on a flannel rag and greeted her with a curious smile. He was in his mid-30s, soft-spoken, with the calm confidence of someone who listened more than he talked. She explained the task, the serial number, the history. Instead of doubting her, he nodded thoughtfully. "That's an old one. Pre-war, bees don't just disappear. They end up somewhere. Sometimes neglected, sometimes cherished. If you're willing to dig, we might find it." The word surprised her more than it should have. They spent days tracing every hint they could find. A retired dealer remembered a similar piano repaired decades ago. A storage manager in Quincy had logbooks dating back 40 years. A former music teacher had seen a pre-war Steinway donated to a nonprofit. Each lead carried them through Boston's musical undercurrent, rehearsal spaces, dusty attics, small theaters. At last, a breakthrough. The Boston Youth Theater, tucked inside an old brick building in the South End, had a Steinway donated in the 1990s. Nathan checked the underside of the frame, brushing away dust to reveal a faint serial number. It matched. Emily felt her breath catch, like something sacred had stepped back into the world. The theater director loved the piano, but admitted it needed significant restoration. Emily negotiated gently, offering to purchase it, not for herself, but for its history. The agreement was fair, and she left a deposit the same day. Nathan handled the restoration, watching him work, his patience, his hand steady as he coaxed music back into the instrument, made something warm settle inside her. Not attraction exactly, but recognition, a softness, a sense of safety she hadn't felt since before Andrew left. The cost was significant, between $30,000 and $60,000 depending on the parts. Emily didn't hesitate. Benjamin's inheritance was still locked behind the completion of all 5 tasks, but she had enough savings to manage the expense. And even if she hadn't, she knew she would have found a way. When the piano was finally delivered to Benjamin's townhouse, polished and resonant, Emily stood in the doorway, listening as Nathan played a single, gentle chord. The sound filled the empty rooms like a blessing. Task 3 completed, but this time the accomplishment felt different, deeper, rooted in something she couldn't yet name. Letter number 4 was shorter than the others, but somehow heavier. Emily felt that weight before she even unfolded the page. Benjamin's handwriting, deliberate as always, stretched across the paper in gentle lines. Emily, dreams are fragile things. They survive only when someone protects them. I was fortunate enough to have people who believed in mine, even when I didn't. Your next task is simple in words, but not in heart. Help a child whose dream is real, so real it scares the adults around them. A child who would lose that dream without you. There was no name, no hint. Benjamin trusted her judgment. Emily didn't need to think long. A single face surfaced immediately. Alice Kim, an 8-year-old student she had taught in her second year of elementary school. Alice was autistic, deeply observant, and almost entirely nonverbal. While her peers spoke in full sentences, Alice communicated through color, shapes, and lines. Her drawings were vivid, strangely emotional, as if she translated feelings into patterns the way other people used words. Alice had a dream, to draw, to create, to make sense of the world through art. And Emily had seen that magic firsthand. But dreams needed support. And Alice's mother, Julia, was drowning. She worked 2 jobs, juggled medical appointments and therapy sessions, and often arrived at parent-teacher meetings exhausted, apologizing for everything she could not provide. Art classes were a luxury far beyond reach. Specialized art therapy programs were even more impossible. Emily felt her purpose sharpen. The South End was home to a respected art therapy studio known for working with neurodivergent children. Its waiting list stretched 5 months, and tuition for a single semester could rival a private school expense. Sponsoring a full year would cost thousands. Emily didn't blink. She scheduled a meeting with the studio director, explained that she wanted to anonymously sponsor a child, tuition, supplies, transportation stipend, everything. The director hesitated until Emily described Alice's drawings in detail. The soft spiral she used whenever she felt safe. The sharp geometric patterns she produced when overwhelmed. The quiet brilliance behind her silent concentration. The director's expression softened instantly. "Children like Alice don't come along often," she said. "We can make this happen." Emily arranged everything quietly. Julia received a call a week later informing her that a scholarship funded by a private donor had opened for Alice. Julia cried, overwhelmed, trying to return the scholarship, convinced it must be a mistake. The studio reassured her it was not. Alice began classes the following Monday. Emily visited the studio discreetly, watching from the doorway as Alice sat at a low table, gripping a set of oil pastels with familiar intensity. A therapist guided her gently, giving space rather than pressure. Half an hour passed. Then something extraordinary happened. Alice paused mid-stroke, looked at her drawing, and whispered a single, clear word. "Blue." The therapist froze. Julia, who had come on her lunch break, covered her mouth with both hands as tears poured down her cheeks. Alice said nothing else, but she had spoken her first verbal word in years, and she had spoken it because of art. Emily stepped back, letting Julia rush forward, letting the moment belong to them. Over the next months, Alice's drawings grew more complex, fluid landscapes, layered colors, soft human shapes. The studio invited her to participate in a small gallery fundraiser featuring student artwork. Emily attended quietly, standing near the back as visitors stopped in front of Alice's framed piece, a swirling composition of blues and greens that seemed to breathe. A local collector purchased it, not as a gesture, not out of pity, because the art was good. Julia hugged Alice tightly that night, whispering something Emily couldn't hear. And for the first time since Andrew walked out, Emily felt a different kind of fullness, one that came not from survival, but from giving. She compiled photos, progress notes from the studio, and a short summary. Then she sent everything to Martin. His reply was immediate. Task 4 completed. Benjamin would be grateful beyond words. Emily rested her hands on her stomach, feeling the faint flutter of movement. Helping Alice hadn't just fulfilled a task. It reminded her that dreams, her babies, Benjamin's, Alice's, even her own, could still have a future worth fighting for. The 5th task did not arrive in a clean envelope or with the calm anticipation of the others. It showed up taped to Emily's apartment door, as if the universe wanted to make sure she couldn't avoid it. The paper felt colder than the November air creeping down the hallway. She peeled it off slowly, fingers trembling, and unfolded Benjamin's final message. Emily, you have restored, repaired, uplifted, and protected. But this last task, this one breaks most people. Forgiveness is not a kindness, it is a release. You're not required to forget, trust, or welcome. You are required only to lay down what is poisoning you. Forgive the person who hurt you the most. There was no signature this time. No yentel ruesturins. Just the edge of truth, sharp enough to cut. Emily sat on the couch, staring at those words until they blurred. The person who hurt her most? She didn't need to think long. The name came with a sting she felt in her bones. Andrew. The doorbell rang before she could process that thought. When she opened the door, a uniformed police officer stood on her porch, hat in hand, expression somber. Ms. Carver? Are you Andrew Collins's emergency contact? Her stomach dropped. I used to be. There was a collision early this morning on the pike. He's at Massachusetts General Hospital. His condition is unstable. Emily gripped the doorframe to stay upright. Her breath came shallow, unsure whether it was fear, anger, grief, or all three. Why? Why are you telling me? You were listed as his next of kin. You're the only contact he had. Emily wanted to slam the door. She wanted to scream that she didn't care, that Andrew had forfeited that right when he walked out on her and their unborn children. But the officer's eyes held quiet empathy, the kind meant for families in shock. And Benjamin's words echoed mercilessly. Forgive the person who hurt you the most. Massachusetts General Hospital smelled of antiseptic, winter coats, and dread. Emily rode the elevator in numb silence, her hand resting protectively over her stomach as the floors ticked upward. She hated that she was here, hated that compassion pulled her into a place she had sworn never to revisit. The ICU was dim, monitors blinking softly in dark corners. A nurse guided her to a curtained room. He regained consciousness once, she explained gently. He asked for you. Emily's heartbeat faltered. When she stepped inside, the man in the bed barely resembled the Andrew she remembered. He was pale, gaunt, a tangle of fore lines and bruises. The arrogant tilt of his chin was gone. So was the smirk. All that remained was fear and a strange, fragile humility. His eyes fluttered open. Confusion thickened his expression until recognition finally surfaced. Emily, his voice cracked. I didn't think you'd come. She swallowed hard. Resentment rose like a tide. Memories of slammed doors, cold silences, the weight of abandonment during the darkest weeks of her life. But underneath that tide was something else. Exhaustion, weariness, a longing to stop being angry. You hurt me, she said softly. Andrew's eyes filled with tears. Not dramatic, not manipulative, real. I know. His voice trembled. I'm sorry. I was stupid. I was scared. And then everything spun out. Emily didn't respond right away. She watched the heart monitor, watched the shallow rise and fall of his chest, watched the way vulnerability clung to him like a second blanket. She realized he couldn't take back what he'd done. He couldn't make her whole. He couldn't undo the pain that had carved itself into every corner of her life. But he also couldn't hurt her anymore. "I forgive you," she whispered at last. "Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." Andrew closed his eyes, relief softening the lines of his face. She would not take him back. She would not forget, but she had released him. Released herself. Emily turned to leave. As she pushed the curtain aside, she felt a weight fall from her shoulders. Quiet, invisible, but unmistakably real. That evening, she emailed Martin a brief message. Task 5 completed. His reply came within minutes. "Emily, Benjamin designed these tasks to test character, not endurance. You have fulfilled everything he asked of you. The estate is now fully yours." Emily set the phone down, her hands trembling, not from shock, but from something she hadn't felt in months. Freedom. Peace. A beginning made possible by letting go. When the official documents arrived from Martin's office, Emily held them with the same disbelief she'd felt since the first phone call on the bridge. A crisp folder embossed with the firm's logo carried everything she had earned through grief, compassion, and 5 tasks that had reshaped her life. Inside were signatures, deeds, account numbers, and valuations that made her chest tighten with something she hadn't felt in months. Stability. She was no longer drifting. Benjamin's estate transferred in full that week. The Beacon Hill townhouse, for stories of brick, slate roof, wrought iron railings, and a quiet dignity that matched Benjamin's presence, was now hers. 2 commercial rental properties in Back Bay and Charlestown, fully leased to stable tenants, provided an income stream she could hardly fathom. A stock portfolio, carefully built over decades, balanced between blue-chip investments and cautious mutual funds, rested under her name. Savings and checking accounts, untouched for months, were transferred seamlessly. And then there was the art collection, curated pieces that revealed the quiet sophistication Benjamin had kept hidden behind his reserved demeanor. Emily signed each document slowly, breathing through the surreal heaviness of it all. She didn't feel wealthy, not in the way people described in movies. She felt responsible, grounded, as though Benjamin had handed her not just resources, but a quiet mandate to live with intention. Martin met her at the townhouse to walk her through the final steps. The home felt different this time, less like someone else's sanctuary, more like a future waiting patiently for her to step inside. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, warming the polished hardwood floors and casting soft shadows on the walls, lined with framed sketches, aged photographs, and shelves filled with classic literature. "Benjamin made one last arrangement," Martin said as they climbed the staircase. "He worried about your pregnancy. He wanted to ensure you wouldn't face early motherhood alone." He stepped aside, revealing a woman waiting in the sitting room. A warm, soft-faced woman in her late 50s, her graying hair pulled into a loose bun. "This is Helen Brooks," Martin said. "She's an experienced nanny. She worked with 3 families long-term, all with multiples. Benjamin contracted her services in advance." Helen smiled gently. "He told me you were strong and kind. I'm here to help however you need. Once the babies arrive." Emily's throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. For months, she had braced herself to raise 3 babies alone. Now a stranger, chosen by a man who understood loneliness better than most, stood in front of her offering support she never expected. "Thank you," Emily managed. "Really?" Helen touched her arm, warmth in her eyes. "You won't be alone. Not anymore." Emily moved into the townhouse 2 days later. Her belongings, what little she still had, fit into 2 carloads. The rest of the space was quiet but welcoming. She spent her first nights sleeping in the 4th-floor bedroom, the windows overlooking the narrow, lamplit street below. The neighborhood felt safe, steady, almost protective. Each morning, she walked slowly down the townhouse steps, one hand on her stomach, feeling the clock of her pregnancy moving closer to its final months. She unpacked Benjamin's books, dusted framed photos of people she would never know, arranged her sparse furniture beside his elegant pieces. Nothing clashed. It felt as if the house understood it was hers now and was adjusting with her. She began cooking again, simple meals, warm bread, soups that filled the home with comforting smells. Neighbors nodded kindly when she passed them on the sidewalk. The noise of her old apartment, the uncertainty of the last year, the ache of abandonment, all felt distant now. Her life wasn't extravagant. She made sure of that. It was calm, grounded, more stable than she had ever imagined possible. As she stood at the window on a quiet evening, a soft breeze drifting through the townhouse, Emily placed both hands over her stomach. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. She was ready for it. Winter settled heavily over Boston by the time Emily reached her 32nd week. The Beacon Hill townhouse was warm and quiet, but her body felt anything but peaceful. Swelling in her legs worsened. Headaches sharpened. A tension she couldn't fully name pulsed beneath her skin. Helen noticed first the way Emily gripped the banister a little too tightly, the way she paused halfway up the stairs to catch her breath. "Let's call your doctor," Helen urged. "Just to be safe." That call changed everything. Her MFM specialist at Massachusetts General Hospital asked her to come in immediately. By evening, Emily was admitted for observation. By the next morning, she was placed on bed rest under strict monitoring. Preeclampsia, early contractions, concerning fetal heart patterns, words she had studied in pamphlets but never truly believed she would hear. The world narrowed to the white walls of a high-risk maternity room, the rhythmic beeps of fetal monitors, and the steady footsteps of nurses checking vitals around the clock. Emily tried to stay calm, but fear dug deep. She wasn't just responsible for herself anymore. 3 tiny lives depended on her holding on. Days blended into one another. Doctors from the MFM unit came in with soft voices and precise explanations. NICU specialists introduced themselves, preparing her for possibilities she didn't want to imagine. Every hour brought a new worry. Blood pressure spikes, contractions that came too close together, sharp pains that left her gasping. Yet she was never truly alone. Grace Hawkins visited first, her eyes full of concern. She brought a stack of crossword books and warm socks, small gifts, simple things, but they meant more than she realized. Grace sat beside her for an hour, talking softly about the school, about Alice's progress, about second chances. It was the first time Emily had seen her former vice, principal, look genuinely vulnerable. Then came Julia, Alice's mother, who arrived after her night shift, still wearing scrubs. She carried a bag filled with snacks, herbal tea, and a small drawing Alice had made, a swirl of pastels that looked like 3 bright stars. She said, "These are your babies," Julia whispered. Emily held the page against her heart. Nathan came one evening after the workshop closed, smelling faintly of varnish and winter air. He brought no gifts, just a steady presence and a quiet confidence she didn't know she needed. He sat in the chair by her bed, hands folded loosely, and asked how she felt. Not the polite version, but the real one. She told him the truth. He didn't look away. "Hold on," he said gently. "You've come too far to be afraid now." At 34 weeks, everything unraveled in minutes. Emily woke at dawn with a splitting headache, her vision blurring at the edges. The monitors beside her bed began to shriek. Nurses rushed in, paging doctors, moving with urgent efficiency that broke through the fog in her mind. "Emily, we need to take the babies now," her MFM doctor said, already helping the nurses unhook her monitors. "Emergency C-section. We can't wait any longer." The hallway lights smeared into streaks as they wheeled her toward the operating room. Her heart pounded, her body trembling. She whispered each baby's name in her mind, like a prayer she wasn't sure she'd be allowed to finish. The surgery began, Cold air, bright lights, voices layered over one another. And then, one by one, the tiny cries began. A boy, Benjamin. Another boy, Mark. And last a girl, Rose. But Rose's cry was faint, fragile, almost non-existent. Emily caught a glimpse of her daughter, small, blue-tinged, struggling, before a team of NICU nurses whisked her away. Panic tore through her as she tried to lift her head, but the anesthesiologist gently pressed her shoulder. "She's in the best hands," he murmured. The days that followed blurred into a haze of exhaustion and fear. Benjamin and Mark needed support, but stabilized quickly. Rose did not. Tubes, ventilators, a constant ballet of nurses, and alarms. Emily could barely breathe each time she stood beside the incubator. She stayed awake night after night, whispering to her daughter through the plastic walls. "Stay with me, Rose. Please stay." And then, slowly, miraculously, Rose began to fight. Numbers improved. Her breathing steadied. Color returned to her cheeks. One morning, a NICU nurse smiled as she approached Emily. "She turned a corner last night. Your girl is stubborn in the best way." Emily pressed her forehead to the incubator, tears spilling freely. For the first time since the emergency surgery, she allowed herself to breathe, deep, full, relieved. All 3 babies were stable, tired, fragile, but stable. And Emily, surrounded by machines and soft newborn cries, realized something else. She wasn't alone anymore. Not in grief, not in fear, not in the world Benjamin left behind for her. She had begun a new life, and now her children had too. The weeks after the triplets came home were a haze of soft cries, midnight feedings, shifting schedules, and a tenderness Emily hadn't known she was capable of. The Beacon Hill townhouse, once echoing and quiet, now pulsed with life, tiny breaths, warming lamps, and the steady presence of Helen moving gracefully through each room. Emily barely slept, but she didn't mind. Every moment felt like both a miracle and a responsibility she carried with a fierce, grounded love. Benjamin and Mark gained weight quickly, their cries strong and unrestrained. Rose, still fragile from her long NICU stay, slept curled against Emily's chest whenever possible, her breathing soft but steady. Emily learned the rhythms of motherhood, the way to cradle 3 infants in a rotation that felt like choreography, the way to interpret each sound, the way to accept help without apology. Helen became part of the new rhythm too. She handled bottle prep like clockwork, soothed fussy babies with the gentlest hum, and insisted Emily nap whenever possible. "You're no good to them, exhausted," Helen would say. Emily knew she was right. It was during one of those rare naps that Helen woke her gently. "Emily, Andrew is downstairs." Emily sat up, the room spinning slightly. She hadn't seen him since the hospital, and part of her had hoped he would simply fade out of her life. But people didn't disappear just because we wished them to. And Andrew, hurt, humbled, changed, stood in the foyer with a tentative stiffness that looked nothing like the man who had walked out months before. "I heard the babies came home," he said softly. I know I don't deserve anything, but could I see them? Just once." Emily hesitated. The weight of the past pressed against the fragile peace she'd carved out for her new family. But forgiveness wasn't forgetting, and it didn't require erasing boundaries. "You can," she said finally, but supervised, and only for a few minutes. Andrew nodded, swallowing hard. When he entered the nursery, his breath caught. The sight of 3 tiny lives, his and Emily's, shook him visibly. He didn't reach out, didn't presume anything. He simply stood there, whispering a soft hi. "I'm your dad," as tears slipped down his cheeks. It hurt Emily in a way she didn't expect, but it didn't break her. She stood tall, steady, certain of the boundaries she would never let him cross again. That afternoon, Martin arrived unexpectedly. He carried a single envelope and an expression Emily had learned to recognize, something between professionalism and reverence. There's one last instruction from Benjamin, he said, handing her the envelope. He asked that I share it only after all 5 tasks were complete and the babies had arrived. Emily opened it slowly. Emily, legacy is not measured in property or accounts. It is measured in what we build for others. Use a portion of my estate, $300,000 to $600,000, to create something lasting. Something that reflects your heart as much as mine. Support autistic children, single mothers, and young artists who deserve a chance. Make it yours. Make it real. B. Emily pressed the letter to her chest. She knew instantly what she wanted to build. Within weeks, she established the Rose Center, named for her smallest fighter. Its mission was threefold: free art therapy programs for autistic children, emergency financial support for single mothers, and scholarships for disadvantaged youth in creative fields. She asked Grace Hawkins, who had shown resilience and transformation in her own life, to serve as operations lead. Grace cried when Emily offered the position. "I don't know why you trust me with this," she whispered. "Because you understand what second chances look like," Emily replied. Together, they found a rental space in Jamaica Plain, sunny windows, open rooms, a perfect blank canvas. Benjamin's funds transformed it into something warm, bright, and full of possibility. Nathan visited often, originally to tune the restored Steinway in Benjamin's townhouse. But his visits lingered, tea shared in the kitchen, soft conversations while the babies slept, simple moments that asked nothing of either of them. He didn't push, didn't pry, didn't try to fill Andrew's empty space. He simply showed up. One evening, as he played a quiet melody on Benjamin's piano, Emily stood in the doorway with Rose in her arms, watching the ease in his posture, the gentleness in his hands. Something was growing between them, slowly, naturally, without expectation. Not a replacement for what she'd lost, but perhaps the beginning of what she deserved. Emily exhaled, holding her daughter closer. For the first time, the future didn't look frightening. It looked possible. The first warm days of spring crept slowly into Boston, brushing the Beacon Hill townhouse with soft golden light. Emily had begun opening the windows in the mornings, letting in the cool breeze that carried hints of magnolia and fresh rain. The triplets, now sturdier, louder, each with their own distinct expressions, filled the home with a symphony of tiny sounds. Life had settled into something steady, grounding, almost unbelievably peaceful. One afternoon, while Rose slept against her chest and the boys napped in their bassinets, Emily wandered through the townhouse, sorting items Benjamin had left behind. She hadn't been ready before, emotionally, spiritually, to touch the pieces of his life that still lingered in corners. But now, with her children safe and the Rose Center blooming into something real, she felt strong enough to face what remained. She paused in front of a faded landscape hanging in the study. It was one of Benjamin's less remarkable pieces, an old frame, simple brush strokes, muted greens and browns. Something about it felt wrong, though. Too heavy for its size, too thick around the edges. Curious, Emily lifted it from the wall. A small slip of paper fell from the back. Benjamin's handwriting unmistakable. "If you are reading this, Emily, it means you looked closely enough. This painting is not what it seems." Remove the canvas carefully. Her heart quickened. She took the frame to the dining room table, spread out soft cloth, and gently pried open the backing. Behind the landscape was another painting entirely hidden beneath the first for decades. It was exquisite, a 19th century American piece. Luminous in style, the surface glowing with soft pastels and precise brushwork. Emily gasped. Even with her limited art knowledge, she knew this was valuable. Very valuable. Tucked inside was a second note from Benjamin. "This belonged to my mother's aunt." It disappeared during our move and resurfaced years later in a private sale. I bought it back, but hid it away. I feared it would be sold or lost again. If you have found it, I trust your judgment. Sell it, Emily. Use what it brings to expand your work. Help mothers who walk the path you walked. Those carrying life while carrying abandonment. Create a place where they don't have to break before they are seen. Emily pressed the letter to her chest, tears gathering quietly. Benjamin had known her long before she knew herself. The sale took several weeks to arrange. Art historians authenticated the piece, and a private collector in New York purchased it for a staggering sum, more than Emily had expected, enough to fully fund the next chapter of the Rose Center. With those proceeds, she launched the Harbor Program, a perinatal support initiative for high-risk mothers facing homelessness, abandonment, or crisis pregnancies. Counseling, medical referrals, emergency housing stipends, services she herself had once needed but never had. The Rose Center scheduled its first consultation for a quiet Thursday morning. Emily arrived early, setting out tea in the lobby while Grace reviewed intake notes. Nathan had offered to come by later to help tune the small upright piano the center had acquired. Everything felt aligned, as though Benjamin's unseen hand still guided the rhythm of her days. When the front door finally opened, Emily looked up. A young woman stepped inside, wrapped in an oversized coat, thin-wristed, exhausted, and visibly pregnant. Not just pregnant, heavily so. Her hands rested instinctively on her stomach, as if holding herself together. I'm here for the Harbor appointment, she whispered. Grace welcomed her, guiding her to a chair. Emily approached gently. What's your name? Rachel, the woman murmured. I am expecting triplets. The father he left when he found out. I don't know what to do. The world stilled. Emily felt the air shift around her, not in fear, but in recognition. Deep, resonant, almost spiritual. She saw herself in this young woman. The trembling voice, the loneliness, the desperate strength of carrying not just life, but disappointment. Benjamin had asked her to create this place, and now the first person through its doors was someone walking the exact path she once stumbled through alone. Emily knelt beside Rachel, taking her hands gently. You're safe here, she said. We'll help you. You won't go through this alone. Rachel burst into tears. Emily held her until the sobs softened into steady breaths. Grace watched, eyes bright. She came to the right place, she whispered. Emily nodded. Yes, she did. That evening, after putting the triplets to bed, Emily descended to the study. The restored Steinway stood in the soft glow of the setting sun, polished and resonant. She slid onto the bench, her fingers trembling slightly before settling into motion. The first notes rose gently, filling the townhouse with a warmth that seemed to reach every corner. Music Benjamin's mother might have played. Music Benjamin himself might have loved. Music that didn't mourn the past, but honored it. Upstairs, she heard the faint stirring of the babies, soft sounds, the chorus of the life she had fought so hard to build. Emily closed her eyes. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was living someone else's story. She felt Benjamin's legacy alive in every note. She felt her own light growing stronger. She felt the world open gently, tenderly, as if offering her a second beginning. Not revenge, not triumph, rebirth, dignity, hope, exactly as Benjamin intended.